My name is Gareth Davies. I was a regular soldier for 25 years or so. I left the army 2 years ago, and I'm now working as a consultant both within the defence industry and specifically for this project within First World War history. Well, shall I tell you how I got interested in the first place? I was in a very small team of British military working for a slightly larger American team run by an American general in 2008, 2009, based in the US consulate in Jerusalem. And we were helping reform Palestinian security institutions. The theory being that if Palestinians could look after their own security, the Israelis would not need to have quite such a large security military presence in the West Bank. And this would be one way of helping that long path to statedom for the Palestinians, the twin state solution. And the team still exists, and it is something that is still being worked on. So I was part of this team. So I was out on the ground in the West Bank and in Israel, and so I got to go and look at a number of the battles. As an aside, I was walking through the old city one evening and saw a photograph of a tank destroyed. The photograph was in an Armenian photographer's shop, and I went in and said, "Why have you got a photograph of a Mark I tank?" And he didn't really know, so he had a look on the back and looked in the records and said, "Well, this is a tank that was destroyed at the Battle of Gaza." Now, I knew about the battles of Gaza. I didn't know any detail particularly at that stage, but even though I was from the Royal Tank Regiment and therefore thought I knew my tank history of the First World War, did not know about the Palestine Tank Detachment. And that's an area I've particularly focused on about 3 years ago, looking into more detail at the Palestine Tank Detachment. So the combination of my interest in tanks in the Middle East, my interest in Palestine, I've now broadened that into a wider interest in the whole of the Palestine Campaign. You asked why we were out there. Well, there are three answers perhaps to that question. We initially go out there because of 1869. 1869, we opened the Suez Canal, and a little bit later we take over official protection of the canal. Egypt, theoretically, is a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, but it's British controlled. And clearly the Suez Canal is a very important strategic asset. It shaves 10 days, 2 weeks off the journey from India to the UK. That is an important journey both for men and materiel. So at the start of the war we ship a division, and then a division is about, well, let's say 15,000 men roughly. We ship the 42nd East Lancashire Division, a territorial force, part-timers, out to Egypt to beef up the defences of the Suez Canal. We also send the 10th and the 11th Indian Divisions from India out there. They don't stay as a division, they're sort of penny-packeted around, but we grow the size of the force slowly over 1914, 1915. The force slightly wanes a little because in 1915 we're busy fighting up in Gallipoli, and that takes up some of the time of the Turks, the Ottomans, and I use the term interchangeably, that we're fighting against, so the threat perhaps reduces slightly. We have a bit of a battle in the Western Desert, the Dorset Yeomanry, particularly heavily involved in that battle, but the majority of the battles of 1915 are purely defensive. And into 16 we beef up the defences because Gallipoli is finished, we can spare some troops, and we bring a number of troops from Gallipoli down to Egypt and then up to defend the canal zone. In August 1916 the Turks attack. They attack a place called Romani. Romani is quite a long way west in the Sinai, 40 miles maybe from the Suez Canal. We fight them off. We fight them off successfully, using mounted troops, including Australians and New Zealanders, and by using infantry, and by using some aircraft. And we fight a decisive victory. This is in, as I say, 4th, 5th of August 1916. In August 1916, things are not going brilliantly for the British, and by British I clearly include all in Empire forces. Things are not going well in Gallipoli. We have failed at Gallipoli. Things are not going well, particularly in Salonika. Things are certainly not going well in Mesopotamia. We've lost Kut. And things are most definitely not going well on the Somme in France a month into the Somme campaign. And so this is a bit of a turning point. The Battle of Romani is an important battle. We win, as I say, a decisive victory. And that does two things. It proves that we can win, and it gets people thinking that perhaps the East does have some merit. That I'm not going to get into the whole debate of Easterners versus Westerners, but perhaps continuing the motion in the East as a way of balancing defeat in the Western Front, we can bring about some good news. We can also achieve something militarily, defeating the Ottomans, which will have a strategic outcome. And so we continue the motion through 1916. We start pushing eastwards through the Sinai, what is now Egypt. And by the end of 1916, we fought a number of battles, which takes us right up to what is now the Israeli-Egyptian Gaza border, finally with the Battle of Rafah in early 1917, in January 1917. And that, as I say, has shown that we can actually achieve some success. Because again, by the end of 1916, success has been pretty limited elsewhere. So we get into 1917 with a different mindset in Palestine, a mindset of we can actually achieve something, both, as I say, perhaps slightly to tell a good story, but also, as I say, it has military and strategic relevance. In March 1917, the command of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, Murray, is given the permission to go on the offensive. And this is partly because Baghdad has fallen at the beginning of March. So yet another, where we've actually had a pretty bad campaign up until then with the fall of Kut. We've recovered from that. We've taken Baghdad. The Turks further east are on the back foot. We want to continue the motion. And so from March 1917 onwards to the end of the war, to the armistice in October 1918, and I did say that correctly, the armistice in October 1918, because the armistice in Palestine is 2 weeks ahead of the armistice in the Western Front. We go on, generally, the offensive, noting that at times one has to pause and go on the defensive. So, to summarise, defence initially, opportunity arises, we take that opportunity, exploit it, and we realise that we can continue this exploitation. We need some more troops, but we continue the exploitation through 17 and 18, and that's how we end up there. Well, in 1917, Allenby certainly understood that the British government had ideas beyond the end of the war. They wanted to shape the outcome I'll rewind. They wanted to shape the world post-war. They wanted to shape it their way. They didn't want to shape it the French way, or maybe even the Arab way. And whilst there was the Arab revolt going on, and we were using, parallel to the Palestine Campaign, Lawrence and his Arab forces, who join up with our forces just after the fall of Jerusalem, we wanted to influence what went on in that part of the world. And that is one of the reasons why we continue, why we see this opportunity that presents itself in early 1917, why we want to take it. To some extent, I think, supported by the Prime Minister, Lloyd George. He has his eye on influencing the world. Do I see the influence of the First World War? Not directly. I think what I see quite clearly is the impact of British government policy towards a Jewish homeland. A policy that I will support, a policy that was expressed in a letter by Lord Balfour to Lord Rothschild on the 2nd of November 1917, so 100 years ago tomorrow, published I think in the Times a week later on the 9th of November. This was the homeland for the Jews back in the Middle East was something that had been looked at for some time. It was starting to surface. And I think this was two things coming together. We were going to be the victors in that part of the world, therefore we were going to be the owners or the protectors of Palestine. This perhaps gave those who wanted a Jewish homeland out there the chance to use the fact that we were going to be protecting that area to their own advantage. And I can fully understand why they would want to do that. So I think it was a number of factors coming together that have caused some of the situations, that caused some of the frictions that go on till today.